excited to have today my good dear friend, the Right Reverend Dr. Yvette Flunder, affectionately known as Bishop Yvette Flunder, who is the founder and the senior pastor of City of Refuge in Oakland, California, and the senior servant, Reverend Edwin Sanders, the founder and senior servant of Metropolitan Interdenominational Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Somebody got to live in Nashville, Tennessee. I am so glad to have you all with me today for this 32nd National Week of Prayer. And when I thought about what can I do special, I'm just so glad you all said yes, because I want to have a conversation with you all. My life is blessed because, we have all three of us were called, because you got to be called. You got to be called by the Lord to do this work. You just don't wake up and do this just because you're trying to do something. You know what I mean? You're convicted, beat up by the Lord to do this work. So, I want to start this conversation today because so many people, when we started out, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no internet. So sometimes we think everybody knows what we've done, and we may be talking to a group of people who don't have a clue. And in this day and age, they may not even know too much about HIV. That they may not even know about HIV and AIDS. So I thought it would be good to start with some history, and I'm going to start with Edwin Sanders, because he was the last to get on the call, of course, and just to talk about, Ed, how you got started in this fight against HIV and AIDS from a faith perspective. What brought you to the conversation, and certainly your work over these last 30 years. All of us got a story on this is where we started, but this is where the road took us in so many different directions. But let's just take a minute to lay the foundation on how you got in this HIV and faith conversation, because the conversation today is then and now. So how'd you get started?
Well, first, Dr. P, let me tell you that it's a distinct honor to be able to be a part of this 32-year celebration. It hardly seems like 32 years. And I want you to know that both of you all look exactly the same way you did 32 years ago.
Oh, bless him, bless him, bless him.
But I want to just tell you very quickly what happened. That really is, for us, it actually represents 37 years ago, but you'll understand that in relationship to the 32 years of the Week of Prayer for the Healing of AIDS. So it was on February the 1st, 1981, that Metropolitan Interdenominational Church had our first worship service. And then, of course, we all know that on June the 5th, 1981, just a few months later, is when the CDC released the document that translated into all of us thinking about this issue of AIDS in the way in which we do until this day. So I always, in a certain sense, feel like our congregation was birthed at a time that was well established on high for us to be a congregation that would be committed to dealing with issues that others were not really open to at that point. But what happened is that we went for 2.5, almost 3 years, and had not one death in our congregation. We were all fairly young. As a matter of fact, I have to own up to it. I think I was 32 years old then. And we were sailing along, having a good time together. And for 2.5 years, and then all of a sudden, one of our 12 founding members got critically ill. And the next thing we knew, we were celebrating his life. And it was not until after we had celebrated his life, funeral and all those things were over and done, that one day, watching public television, my wife and I saw a story about this virus, HIV. And there's a way in which, at that very moment, as they described the opportunistic diseases that you became vulnerable to when you evolved to full-blown AIDS, they called the name, the reference to the particular disease that we had never heard of before, that the doctors had said and identified as the cause of our founding member's death. So at that very moment, we knew that although it seemed like everybody around us was talking about this particular issue in terms of it being a gay white male disease, we looked around at each other and said, well, it's clear that our friend and our founding member did not fit the profile. And at that moment, we started talking about what this probably meant for Black people. And then we decided to just start and try to educate ourselves. And then education went to prevention initiatives, and prevention initiatives went to social services, and social services eventually evolved into a primary care clinic designed to serve especially folks with HIV. So the beginning was that it came home to us, and we could not deny it or escape it.
I remember coming to Nashville and for the I think it was American Bible College, I believe.
That's right. That's
And
right.
that's when
American
I
Baptist
and
College.
that yes, and that's when I was introduced to you and the work that you all had just gotten started. And that's before we started running the world, if you will. If you will.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. So Bishop Yvette, you know, we're gonna keep it clean on this webinar. We're not gonna tell no stories. Because I don't remember the first time I met you. I really don't. I've been in my brain trying to search down every kind of avenue I can, and it's just like you just appeared and you were always there. But I don't remember the very first moment. So tell us about the City of Refuge and just how you got started on your journey.
Well, actually, the work around HIV and AIDS, education and support began when I was the associate pastor at Love Center Church. I was there for 10 years before we came to City of Refuge, and City of Refuge is just turning 30 years old, so that was 40 years ago. And
Wow.
it was back during that time before I left Love Center that close to the time we started City of Refuge, that I got deeply engaged in providing help and services and getting funding to provide services to create a hospice for people dying with this disease, primarily gay men. We couldn't understand what in God's name was going on in the truest sense of the word, but people were dying. And we got involved and engaged and got a house and tried to find money, and some of them had to redirect their funds, their own funds, to their own care during that time. So that was really the early time. And it became overwhelming after a while. And not long after that, when we left Love Center and went to San Francisco, left Oakland, went to San Francisco, we were in the belly of the beast. We were in the triangle right there where the Castro meets the Western Addition. And in San Francisco, Castro Street is gay Mecca, essentially. And that's where we ended up doing services and having a worship space right in that neighborhood. Consequence of which is from when the medication was compound Q.
Mm.
This was during GRID and ARM, and if you remember, before it was called HIV and AIDS and such. We had some underground work with some of the medications that were being tested in the basement of our church, where we were holding up the bags of medication on coat hangers, while
Mm.
some of the rebel doctors and nurses were trying out what became a principal medication for people living with HIV. So that's where it actually started, because San Francisco was truly the belly of the beast during that time. For me, theologically in particular, I had some serious personal encounters with HIV that got me involved. My daughter's father, my former husband, a while after we divorced, started showing some behaviors that suggested that it was HIV. HIV-related dementia, you all may remember that.
Hmm.
And I got involved and engaged in his care during that time. And he eventually died from the disease. And so did a whole bunch of other people in and around the church, in and around gospel music, in and around work that we were doing. And it became overwhelming. And I recall one day I sat down and I had some bourbon whiskey, about this much.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned all the lights off, and it's a Donny Hathaway music, the song in particular, Giving Up, is hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Yep. So I turned that on, and I was drinking the whiskey, and I said, I can't do this, multiple loss syndrome, I think, 3 people a week, 4 people a week. It was just way too much. And it was in that moment that it became clear to me that we needed to do this collectively as people of faith. That what we were bearing, we could not even really share with the AIDS activists that were in the street, because this thing with the church carried all sorts of other stigma that they could not even understand, right? And it wasn't long after that I went to one of those conferences and I met you, P, and not long after I met Elder Sanders and all of our friends. Jackie was sort of our leader during that time
Jackie
period.
Wilkerson. Mm-hmm.
Yes, because she
Mm-hmm.
pulled us on into it. And I had help then. I had help for my soul and for my mind and for my spirit, for my grief. I'd like to say that my grief process, because of the multiple losses, needed some healing. And I needed to be around some people that could get under the burden, because we were just beginning what would be decades of this work. And we are just now seeing daylight. It's amazing to me that it has been this long. And that's what I say to these people who are taking casually the viruses that are causing pandemics now. You got to jump on it. We had different kinds of resistance,
Right.
because there was a lot of faith folks that were our resistance. And the fact that our churches had not wrestled with human sexuality, and it was a sexually transmitted disease for the most part, and that was just a huge problem to be able to deal with it. But I say to folks now, be serious about this. Pay attention, because you could be 30 years down the line and still have this to deal with, because we are not putting a hand on it as quickly as we should. So that's how we got connected. Jackie had a lot to do with that. And the next thing I knew, people were calling me Pernessa, calling Pernessa Yvette, which I
That
found so interesting, because we were both
we
little.
enjoyed that, didn't we?
Oh yeah, we got off on it. They didn't call you Yvette, Edwin. But they did call P. She called P me and called me P, which I thought was quite something. But it was a great time, and it shifted so many things for us to get involved. But just to your question, that was the genesis of it for me. Was very personal. My losses were very personal. And I have counted my obituaries. I have 149 funerals that I oversaw myself. So not just that I attended, but that I officiated. So there are many, many, many things that have led us up until this time, but we are prepared by this experience for most anything else that comes down the line at this
Mm-hmm.
point. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I recall.
I often don't share that before the week of prayer, a very dear friend of mine, who happened to have been, I had a cultural arts program. I used to, I decided I was going to have a ballet and jazz and violin and music out in Brooklyn. And I had some of the most extraordinary musicians in New York coming to teach at my school, because I just make stuff up. And one of those people was Lionel Stubblefield. And he came to be the piano teacher at the Brooklyn Truth Center, and the pastor loved him. He became the choir director, and we became very dear friends. And we would, get a car from Manhattan to Brooklyn every Sunday. We were just balling out, going to Brooklyn to church on Sunday. And all of a sudden, Lionel was sick, and was just physically sick, but would not say what was going on with him, would not say what was wrong. And fast forwarding, one Wednesday night's choir rehearsal, he didn't show up. And we were so concerned. And some of the choir members took a car from way out in Brooklyn all the way up to Harlem. And it was the choir members that found him in his chair in his little apartment in Harlem. He had succumbed to HIV and AIDS. And we would just see on Sunday mornings, we would just see his illness was just in front of us, you know. So, you know, that came before the idea of a Harlem Week of Prayer. And I often don't share that story because I think we all had, you know, we all were touched in so many different ways about this thing that I truly did not understand. And in that conversation, my violin teacher called me and said, did he, what is this grid? I think it was HIV. Nobody knew what it was. And he said, Pernessa, if I get it, I'll kill myself. And certainly, guess what? 3 months later, he got it and he jumped off his building in Harlem. You know, just like he said he would if he had gotten it. He could not imagine. I mean, this was a great international violinist, and he couldn't imagine living with this disease. And he said, if I ever get this, I will kill myself. And that's exactly what he did. And I'm having emotions because I usually that's so buried down in me. I don't let it bring up. But you know, where are we? You know, we are that was then. What were some of the things? And you know, both of you, you know, sat on the president's policy. You know, you all have been very far more involved with policy than I was. Yvette and I used to run around the country down to CDC and beat up CDC, and we'd take planes and get to CDC. Then they wouldn't even see us when we got there. Oh my goodness. But you know, but you said you were both of you were on the president's council, HIV council, in terms of policy. That we'll come back to the church, but what has shifted? Has anything shifted from the Clinton? Those were the Clinton days, from Clinton to Bush to Obama to to Trump. Uh, did anything come out of those policies that you all sat around and discussed?
Hmm.
And I'll start with you
Yeah.
because you
Okay.
you have missed the policy. You've been on more policy boards than everybody.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Even when I consider what that means, Vanessa, I think of it because I think in the early stages, um, just like it was the case that people did not want to touch the individuals who were dealing with this disease, they also didn't want to deal with the persons who were advocating and people who
That's
were
right.
affirming and people who were supporting. So I discovered early on that the invitations did flow in my direction to be involved in a lot of issues related to developing a response, especially in our communities, just simply because I was one of the few, you know, black preachers in and around that was willing to stand up and say, you know, these two,
Mm-hmm.
you know, are the ones that our
Whosoever
Lord
will.
gave His life for, and I was uncompromising about that. So that translated into participation. But let me tell you what happened when we ended up on these various advisory boards and the like. One of my first advisory boards was an appointment that did come actually from President Clinton to the CDC advisory board. And I remember my first experiences there on that board because they were on the cutting edge of starting to talk about, you know, the ways in which the antiretroviral drugs, the whole protease inhibitor syndrome, and developing responses were on the table. And I remember being in those rooms thinking to myself, now, why am I here? My familiarity with the jargon was almost non existent. There's a way in which the things that they talked about were not things I easily was able to identify with. But after I sat there a while, I did develop this though, and this does take it back to our faith some, Vanessa. I did get to where I would go to those meetings and sit, and you know, it's hard for me to be quiet. I would sit there and just be quiet and pray. I
Mm.
would just pray over the folks who were on the cutting edge and talking about what the changes need to be made and developments that could occur. Out of that, though, I found myself realizing that there was language that we had to bring to the table. I say we in this instance because if either one of you had been at the table, you would have brought the same language to it. Because we started using language that was framed more out of the experience of our faith. And there's a way in which there was so much that was perpetuating and so much that was driving the conversation. On top of the fact that it was scientifically grounded, it was also still very what I call fear driven. And we were in the process and in the business of trying to promote that which represented hope and that which represented the infinite possibilities of the God that we serve to make a difference when it seemed like no other difference could be made. So what I found on those committees and in those situations was opportunity. Now, I would venture to tell you, I used to, I should tell you, Pernessa, talking about political involvement, and I know Yvette can laugh with me on this one because I used to, on my resume, include the fact, and it was something I was very proud of up until recently, and you'll understand why. I used to say that I had appointments to the various advisory boards by all of the presidents from Clinton forward. Then I got to where, of course, in later times, which we can all identify with, I was not interested in anything that identified me with the last of those presidents. But President Clinton, I was blessed to be appointed to the CDC board. And then, of course, with President Bush. And he looked around and found out that there were few of any African Americans who were dealing with these issues that had ever had any identification with the Republican Party. And I always have to own up to that because you understand I'm old enough that, I remember wearing I like Ike buttons when I was a little boy because black people were not Democrats. Black people were Republicans. We were in the party of Lincoln. And there's a way in which they somehow found out that I had some history there. So they invited me to be a part of the Bush administration, President's Advisory Council. I'm kind of saying that to you to say there seems to have been at least some degree of commonality, a thread of commonality with the administrations in the White House through those three presidents, Clinton and then Bush and of course President Obama, where the issue of HIV AIDS was front, center, squarely on the table. And I think that we ended up being the ones that would bring a perspective that mandated that whatever was going on politically, whatever the developments were that were evolving scientifically, that none of it was going to add up to a hill of beans if indeed the voice of faith and the voice of our congregations and our communities that are grounded in that faith were not a part of it. And Pernessa, I want you to remember a date, and it was February the 28th, 1994, when this little woman invited a
whole slew of us to the White House,
to Washington, D.C. And the agenda was to declare war, a declaration of war against HIV and AIDS in our communities. Now, see, Pernessa, you had this moment when I think there was the fusing, there was the intersection, there was the coming together that made folks say, we could not deal with this without bringing the faith community into the equation. And that was the day when I, at the end, and Yvette, she tricked me a little bit, let me tell you, because I did not know that when we got ready to leave, she was going to say, I need each and one of you to write down some commitment that you will make. Now, I was about to miss my plane. I wanted to get on, and I'd heard some great voices. I met some great people. It was a great session, but I knew I had to get back to Nashville. And lo and behold, when she said you had to fill out a form, and I didn't feel like writing a short dissertation or thesis or anything thereof, I wrote on my paper that for the next year, 52 Sundays in a row, I would figure out how to weave HIV AIDS into every worship experience that we had. Little did I know now, that was almost a signature on an agreement that would lead to some troubling times at Metropolitan Church. But I will say to you, this is it, because Yvette, you've got just as powerful and longer stories I do on this one. What I did discover, though, was this. I came to the point where I realized that I could address the issue of HIV and AIDS in every biblical story, reference, account that I could find. It ended up being, what I thought was going to be very difficult to do really turned out to be so complementary to the teachings of justice and to the teachings of, equity and equality, to the teachings of freedom and liberation. There was a point at which the intersection was there. And it was then that I began to just faithfully preach it, teach it. Sometimes it was just a litany, or sometimes it was a prayer. But most of the time, I figured out how to, even to the point that I remember some of my members started coming to me saying, Rev, I think you're about to beat this, this issue to death. Maybe you better step away from this one. I don't know if you noticed, but it's some empty seats out there that used to be filled. And I said, no, we have to do it.
Where are we with those policies today? We know that we're in the midst of another pandemic, COVID. And we know that, this time around, we did some real good work 30 years ago, because people are not fighting to get the voice of faith in now. They just call and call and call, and they understand. And I truly believe that they understand because of the whelps on all of our backs, because they certainly were not understanding that when we were out there talking about HIV and AIDS. So Yvette, tell us about the policies that you see changed, policies that didn't go through. And maybe there's a thread that go through these policies from where we were back then to where we are today, perhaps.
Well, probably the two things that come up most for me began before I was invited by the Obama administration to be a part of the HIV and Hep C Council. It began because we were doing work with PEPFAR and AMFAR and that sort of thing, and also really deeply involved and entrenched with theological education and bringing these themes into the institutions while they're preparing pastors and leaders to do work. I started teaching at all of the schools that you all know of, talking about the ministry of this epidemic and all of the broad realities that have to be addressed. Women's needs, the realities of theology that is inclusive, particularly the LGBT community, having a focus on what is happening in Africa, which was 100-fold greater than what it was that we were experiencing in the numbers here in the United States. And then working very closely with the African-American gospel music community. When Edwin and Donald Lawrence and Richard Smallwood and Walter Hawkins got together and wrote and penned the song One Voice, and we were able to record it and create a training piece around it and use it to kind of go from state to state, place to place. Gospel music has a way of being of opening doors. You can sit right next to somebody that you flat out disagree with.
That's right. That's right. Kirk Franklin was a part of that.
Yes. That's right.
I was in the studio with you on that one. I was in the studio. Yeah.
Everybody who was anybody that was gospel music. One of the hardest things to do was to round them all up. BB was in it. Sarah Jordan Powell, Tremaine, me.
It was incredible.
It was a wonderful opportunity to. And one of the ways in which we got information into the Black church was through the medium of gospel music, because it was an equalizer in several ways. And that opened up the door to be able to. So I think it was on the wings of that we got involved in the HIV and Hep C Council with President Obama. And we were still on the council when we changed over to the Trump administration. As soon as we changed, however, I resigned. I was the first person to resign. And there were several other people who resigned. I did not want my footprint anywhere in that administration, and I'll say that very clearly, on my name used in any way. And some people thought I was unwise who believe now that I was very wise in terms of the decisions that were made around that. I say that to say that what I also saw, which I continue to push back against, was the presence, particularly of PEPFAR, and the way in which PEPFAR, who was made up primarily of fundees who were totally against teaching people about safer sex, and also totally against women having the option, should they want to terminate a pregnancy when they find out that they were positive. So they were totally against that. They were only for caring for people after they got sick. But the whole conversation about prevention as it related to safer sex and such like, and condoms, none of that. They wouldn't do any of that.
Right.
Yet they got the lion's share of funding, major, massive amounts of funding, particularly like on the continent of Africa and a few other places, which seemed to me to be so disingenuous and hypocritical. It was conservative Christianity making money off of sick people, as far as I was concerned. And so that was the water that we had to carry during the Obama administration. So anyway, I stayed in trouble, which I sort of do anyway. But the in trouble part was that, and so I'll tell you just this piece. I was invited to one of our national AIDS events. If you remember, it was in DC one year, and Rick Warren was having a luncheon. And I don't know how I got an invitation, but I was one of about 6 Black people that were there. There weren't any other Black people. And so for some reason, they put us all at the same table, which I thought was really quite something. So there we were, Black folks from the U.S. and a couple of folks from Africa. And we were all sitting around the table and greeted one another. And so I was listening. Lindsey Graham was the speaker that day at Rick Warren's welcome and invitation. And so my blood started to boil, as it began to boil, because the PEPFAR people were talking about all the sick Black people they were taking care of in Africa. But they weren't talking about how they were profiting off these sick Black people, because they weren't teaching them anything about safer sex and anything about what I just lifted up. And so I was chatting about it with the Africans and African Americans at the table while in between Lindsey Graham's comments. And one of the African brothers said to me, he said, "Sister," he said, "we agree with you." That's what he said to me. He said, "but we need money to dig wells." That's what he said to me. Now, that may seem like an oversimplification, but that brother changed my thinking in that moment, which I took back to one of my conversations with PEPFAR. Essentially, you're not helping our people. What you're doing is being a great white hope around some things, but simultaneously, you're not doing the work that needs to be done to stop the spread of AIDS. I don't think that you even really care about that. And they can't really complain about it because they need money, they said.
That's right.
To dig wells.
That's right.
The great hypocrisy, as I came to call it. So that was my experience. Go ahead. In terms of policy, and now it is my experience again because I'm deeply involved in the Equality Act. That is now what we're talking about, because I see the same thing in many ways happening again in terms of people banking on the frustration of white conservative Christianity to move them along politically and raising buku grand theft dough, to do what it is that they want to do to move along politically at our expense. Once again, at the expense of people, of women, people of color, of LGBT people, and of inner city people. It's amazing. I'm hoping that our learnings as we are progressing will help us to see how this has been a part of the issue ever since they were singing hymns and lynching and roasting Black people for entertainment at the end of a service, that now the lynching and roasting of people of color and of gay people and of women who want to choose has sophisticated itself to suggesting that religious freedom means that folks should be able to hate you if they want to and stop you at the door if they want to. So like what we did, all three of us around HIV and AIDS, we don't have to put our money toward that because we don't like the people who are the most infected and affected by it. We are at it again. It is happening again. And there's an upsurgence of conservative white Christianity that is at the root of it, just like it was at that luncheon, just like it was when we started doing the work. But we're different.
That's
And
right.
we are calling it out. And I think we are back in it again because we have to call it out to keep from losing all of the things that we worked to create. We changed something. The three of us right here
Absolutely.
shifted a whole
Absolutely.
paradigm.
That's
Not
right.
that there weren't other people, but we shifted a whole paradigm because we put our flesh in it, our
That's right.
bodies, our money. Come on, Ed, our
Yes.
reputation,
Yes.
Everything. Everything.
because
Yes.
people
Everything.
came for us. The gay people questioned you, Ed, because you're not gay. Okay,
Yes.
they wasn't sure about Pernessa, but they was flat out sure about me. Okay, and the straight people got mad, the gay people
That's
got
right.
mad,
That's right.
but
That's
we
right.
pushed the envelope on this, and change happened. Thanks be to God. There was no Gilead then. Change happened because we lit a fire up under people. So here we are again. We're
That's
still
right. That's
alive.
right.
We're
Still
still,
alive.
we're still in the fight.
We're always running out of time. But I wanted to
Yeah.
say to piggyback on that, Yvette, was the Balm and Gilead. We got in some kind of way under the door. We got into 6 African countries through PEPFAR,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it
Yes.
was the worst. I don't even know if they were the best of times. They were some of the worst of times
Mm-hmm.
because the Africans had never seen African Americans coming
Yeah.
to say, here, my brother, my sister, let's do this together. We are one. They had never seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were saying, listen, CDC, we have to give money to the
Yes.
Africans.
Yes.
You can't expect them to show up and not get paid. Give them $5,000 for writing on a tablet. I got a computer, and you don't want to give them money for a salary.
Yep.
So we came in talking about you have got to give people money for salaries. It was a whole new paradigm shift. And
Yes.
NGOs now, the Balm and Gilead shifted that because we cannot work with people who you are not paying.
Come on.
And that's a part of
Mm.
some of the things we did but that's in the history book of shifting these Wick Warrens, these NGOs, missionary type NGOs coming into Africa, getting Africans to do the work, giving them the data and not paying them. And
Truth.
that's the piece we shifted it. They would bring in people from Belgium to do the work. So, sooner or later, who got kicked out of the countries. We got absolutely we
I
got
sure do.
absolutely kicked out of Cote d'Ivoire, kicked out of Kenya,
Congratulations.
kicked
Congratulations.
out, kicked out. And I
Congratulations.
can elaborate on that. And I agree that the three of us, I'm just honored because we put everything in it. And one thing I want to, before we go back, we're going to close up with the church. Before I go back, I always remember the fight we had, Yvette and Ed, around the Black AIDS Awareness Day. Remember that fight?
Oh, yes.
And it came up because when I tell the story, people really don't believe me. It's hard for them to believe that CDC really created this because they didn't want to work with the church.
Yeah.
This was before. Bush came in and said we're gonna work with the church, but Clinton was like separation of church and state,
Yeah.
and they were like, well, we needed something else. This week of prayer is not working. We needed something else, and then it was the first Black AIDS Awareness Day was a week before the week of prayer. And
Right.
Yvette I didn't even have to say anything. Yvette fought that fight. She was like, no, 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 no,
No.
no, no, no. And it was because of the three of us stood up. And that's why
Yeah.
it's 1 month before the week of prayer today. But everybody was not on this page, and we had to fight principalities as
Yep.
well as faith folks. But we were,
Yes.
and that's why I wanted to talk about policy, because folks see us today and they think that we are just talking about faith. But we were shutting down CDC. We were fighting. We were protesting. We were fighting for everybody, those who were in, those who were out. You know what I mean? Those who were up, straight, over, under, who
Yes.
didn't know. We were in there for the cause. And
Yes.
and I just wanted to kind of
There would
talk
not
about that week
be
of prayer.
there would
Yeah.
not be a minority AIDS initiative if
That's
it had
right.
not been for us.
No.
That's exactly
I know
right.
that that is true. And I need history to really know that.
Right.
There
That's
would
right.
not have been, if we hadn't created a walkout and a protest and went to the bar, we got it done in the bar.
In the bar
Thank
that night,
God for Jesus and bourbon. We got that thing done.
Yeah.
everybody was drinking whiskey that night in Atlanta.
That night, honey.
Right.
And Benny Prim then took us to Washington D.C.
That's right.
and Deborah Fraser House came in, but
That's
it
right.
wouldn't have happened. And I wonder where that minority AIDS initiative money goes today. I
Yeah.
don't think it circles back into our community like it was supposed to.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Right.
But I want to bring that up around just how incredible this walk has been with us, and it's not over. It's not over yet.
That's
So
right.
let's take the last few minutes and talk about our beloved church, our church. Oh, don't we just love the church? I love the church.
Yeah.
Where are we today, Yvette? Where are we today? Where have we been? We know where we've been. Where are we? Are the doors? Are the radical inclusiveness? Is it happening? I'm sure it's better. I think it's better now. I think it's better now. But we still have a long. People are still putting policies. It's amazing to me when I go on some of these denominational policy statements, what they take the time to write a policy against,
Mhm.
and what they don't take the time to write a policy for. It's amazing to me. But let me not get on my soap opera. Let me give it to you and Ed.
Yeah.
Yvette, what do you think? Where are we today?
Well, let me tell you one of the things that's really significant about where we are today, especially when you line where we are with HIV and AIDS up against and beside where we are with COVID-19. One of the things with HIV and AIDS in the church was very often people took the avenue of using the scapegoat that they were ill-informed and misinformed in regard to, in terms of the way in which they could disassociate themselves from persons who were being affected, primarily around issues of sexuality. Although, of course, as it evolved, it became some issues that had to do with issues of injection drug use, and but things that they were easily able to frame in a way that said this is a problem for them because they are not living lives that are consistent with the Word of God, how we were reading it. Well, that was then. And one of the things that happened in that was the way in which it lent itself to the ability to disassociate. Even if you look at it, not just in terms of the Black church, but look at it even in terms of, the church period. One of the things we do know around HIV is that the whole issue of same gender loving people being disproportionately impacted was the basis upon which there was an avenue to escape forthrightly dealing with the issue. That's the way the right wing, conservative evangelicals chose to do it. But something that is different about where we are today is that that scapegoat no longer exists. Death is death at a certain point. And there's a way in which people in our communities have come to have a greater openness to appreciating the fact that this is an issue to be addressed from within the church, primarily on the basis of the fact that there's no longer the ability to say this does not represent something that is clearly grounded in the theology and into the spiritual history of who we are as a people. And consequently, because you just think about it, the people who were on the front line most vigorously at the early stages of HIV and AIDS were mostly there for altruistic kinds of reasons. And that meant dealing with the realities that were tied to sexuality. But today, we're dealing with something that is still tied to what now see, I would say when I go back to thinking about HIV and AIDS, I didn't see any need to associate that with anything that I would call sin. But I do find something that I associate with sin when I talk about the ways in which the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, especially as relates to economic, educational, and health kinds of opportunities, in the ways in which we know for a fact that when you look at the correlating factors that are part of who's being most disproportionately impacted, what you can't help but see is that it has to do with the ways in which the gulf between the haves and the have-nots is probably broader and wider than ever before. And then there's the continued legacy of the perpetuation. My favorite sermon for the year of 2020, little did I know I'd still be preaching it into 2021. I have preached it to law firms, some of which are the largest and more influential law firms around the country. I have preached it to programs dealing with people coming out of situations of incarceration. I've preached it in churches and everywhere else. And the title of that sermon has been Myths, Lies, and Misrepresentations of the Truth. Myths, lies, and misrepresentations of the truth. I want you to know so much of what we're dealing with to this day is still grounded in those myths, in those lies, and in those misrepresentations of the truth that allowed for anybody to be discounted, dismissed, left out, treated as an other in a way that did not allow us to see them as sister and brother.
Yes.
And I think that where we are today, Dr. P, and the reason why your road ahead of you and the work to be done is as great, if not greater, than it's ever been before. If you needed any evidence of it, if you thought for a minute you might be over the hump, I just want you to go back to the day of Pentecost 2021. You do realize that January the 6th was the day, I said the day of Pentecost, I'm sorry, not the day of Pentecost, but the day of Epiphany 2021.
2021.
The day of Epiphany 2021. I mean, you talk about if you didn't have an awakening that day, that the struggle is just as much a reality now as it ever was before. So, but now there are those who can see the contradiction when they look up and see somebody waving a flag that says Jesus saves next to a Confederate flag, next to a T-shirt with a Q on, and go down the litany and say, hey, this is mixed up, this is messed up. So I'm just saying that I think we need the emphasis on days, weeks, months, like we're celebrating and like we're identifying as being an essential part of our experience right now. So the week of prayer, the healing of AIDS, and even your evolution in that regard, Pernessa, I think is very significant because there's a way in which I felt when you moved from just saying week of prayer, the Black Church week of prayer. First it was Harlem week of prayer. Then it became the Black Church week of prayer. Now it's become the National week of prayer because we understand. That's right. That what we have done in terms of transformation and change amongst white congregations and people is as much a part of what has to be done as anything. Was it Pablo Ferreira had that great quote where he said that, that the way in which we stand as activists against the injustices is something that's not completely done until we see those who are on the other side of the issue recognize that they too, have to join us. And I think we're seeing more and more that there are those who are recognizing that for them,
let's go
Let me pass that baton,
let's
please.
give Yvette.
Okay.
We are running out of time.
I'm not
I
going to
knew we
preach that
would.
whole sermon right now, but you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I see you. Well, there's probably two things that I would leave with you. Our theme for the fellowship for this coming year, as I shared with P earlier, is have we got good religion?
Mm-hmm.
And we are asking that question, I think, for two specific reasons. First of all, I like John 1:27. Good religion and undefiled is this, that you care for the widows and orphans, and that you are unspotted from the systems of the world, from the world. And the widows and orphans, of course, represented those people who were the most abused, sidelined, made poor, sold into debtor's prison and such during the time, and was the real genesis of why we have a diaconate, frankly, in our churches, was to care for the widows and orphans. Well, I think that that is one reality that is a litmus test to your question, P, about whether or not we have good religion in what is happening among us in the Black church. But the other thing I'd like to leave sort of as teaching and preaching and such fodder for as we go forward was the incident of when Jesus went into the temple. And in his coming into the temple, he saw certain realities happening. He saw people who were coming in to offer sacrifice. He saw the people who were giving them the goods to offer the sacrifice, pigeons, doves, sheep, for a certain amount of money. They had to buy those things. He saw the money changers who were giving them the sacrifice animals for a interest. Essentially, it's a $5 animal, but I see you don't have but $3. If you'll pay me $8 at the end of the week, I'll let you have the animal. And then they saw the priests who are requiring the animal in order for people to have their sins forgiven. All of that was going on in the temple at the same time. Everything playing off of something else. I'm a penitent. I need to have a sacrifice. There's somebody that's going to sell it to me, that's going to hit me up for some money and some extra money, kind of like that building fund we were talking about earlier, Pete.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's my heart that believes I have to make the sacrifice in order to be right before God, according to the priest. And everybody's playing off of somebody else. The whole situation pissed Jesus off horribly. And he went through there and turned the tables over and shot the whole thing to hell, if you understand what I'm saying. And
So
said,
did.
you have made my house a den of thieves. My father's house has been desecrated but it begs the question when I think about the role and the future of the Black church. And I'm not talking about everybody's church. Now, if I could just distill this to what our pain and suffering should have taught and should be teaching us. The question is, who are you in the temple? Are you the penitent? Are you the clergy person who is requiring the penitent to do certain things that you know they can't afford to do? Are you the money changer? Right? Or are you Jesus with a stick?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the question is for me, who are we and why are we doing what we are doing? What is our role? And I don't say that saying that I have an answer for everybody. The only person I can answer for is myself.
Mm-hmm.
Have I got good religion? And then the real question is, why am I here? Why do I continue to do the work that is called religion? If I am in any way using my power, my influence, my alleged connection to God on your behalf, if I am using any of that to either bleed you for my own benefit or for the benefit of those that I need to work in and
Mm-hmm.
around what we're doing to keep this hustle going, if you understand what I mean, then we need to re-examine the whole thing.
That's right.
And somewhere along the way, what used to be house churches where people used to go sit around and talk and eat each other's food and recline on the floor. That's what Jesus and them did. They ate with their hands and drank a lot of wine. A lot of wine. I just
A
have
lot
to
of
tell you
wine.
that they were
Yes,
known
they drank
for
a
it.
lot of wine.
They
They
were the
did.
wine bibbers and
Yes,
the
they drank a
gluttons.
lot
That's
of
what they
wine.
called them. But the church began with reclining on the floor, having conversation, taking care of one another. And before it got out of the New Testament, it had already evolved such that Paul said, "This is not the feast that the Lord required. What you all are doing is you eating up all the food before the people get here. And when they get here, it's nothing but, greasy lettuce left where the chicken used to be. And there's something wrong with that. But all we get from that passage are the words that we utter before the supper. If you understand, this is my body broken for you. But read it down to the end and read when he really says that I got an issue with you. Because if you really love one another, this is my favorite part of that chapter. He said, wait for one another. What does it mean? I think that we have become something mimicking the people that we were impressed with. And we need to take this pandemic and really hear from the Spirit of God about what really does constitute church. When are we having church? And then we can go to what it is that you're talking about, Edwin, because the Spirit of God is still sending Saul to Ananias. Saul didn't get turned into Paul till he went down Straight Street to see Ananias. You know the story. And Ananias had to lay hands on him, right? So he could see again. And then he had to Spencer, the man that came to kill him. And Ananias, who is like us, often we want to say back to the Lord, really, why would you send him to me? Because I really do want to bust him upside the head. That's what I really want to do. But you see, to me, he can't get to where he is going if we are not prepared to really be the church, if we are not prepared to be very clear about what our role is when we are in the work of ministry, then we are not going to be able to help Ananias, or rather help Saul become Paul as Ananias, because we're too much like Saul to help him. We are mimicking him, and he needs us to set him free. I believe that what the church has become needs the experiences that we have had to liberate people to become a location for justice and truth and peace and power and help and healing. We have got to go back to where the kind of church your grandmother had and your
Yeah.
grandfather had, where it was all about helping the young mothers, helping the sick, seeing to the
Yes.
poor.
Yes.
What happened to that?
Mm.
When did we become a
That's right.
choreographed presentation?
That's right.
When did that happen to
Mm.
us? So
Mm.
that is what my heart says.
Mm-hmm.
That is our next move in
Mm-hmm.
the growing. And so anyway, that would
Yeah.
be the Flunderism on it today.
Yeah. Thank you, Bishop. Thank
I
you, Bishop.
am so happy that we've had this time together. I wish we did not have to jump out, but we
Yeah.
have to jump out. And family, thank you for joining with us. I know that there are those of you, especially, the emerging pastors, if you will,
Mhm.
those who are finding your footsteps in the pulpit. You want to make a difference. Call us. We are now the elders. We are now
Yep.
the elders,
Yes.
and trust me, you are our legacy. Those of
Yes,
you
indeed.
want to, pick up this mantle and carry on, who don't mind being beaten up, under fire in the marketplace, because this journey requires
Yeah.
that you stand in the furnace.
Yes.
You stand in the furnace. You don't know what's going to happen. You just know you believe Jesus is going to show up. And I'm telling you, all three of us know, we bear witness that it's not a Bible story that we've read. We have been in the furnace, and
Yes.
Jesus has certainly stirred up. So if you've enjoyed this program and you have a burning in your heart, contact any one of us. Those who come behind us, you are in fact our legacy. And I just want to thank you, my brother Edwin, for your love, for being on this journey. And you, my sister Yvette,
I
just
love you,
got
man.
nothing but love for both of you.
Hmm.
And just thank you. Thank you. We've done a mighty work. And guess what?
Yeah.
We still got a mighty work ahead of us. But
Yes.
the legacy is in those who come behind.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing to be an elder now.
Yes.
I love teaching. I love sharing. I love sharing about the old rugged cross and the new cross indeed.
Yes, 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 yes.
Because the old rugged cross, I tell you, it has some good stuff and it
Yeah.
has some not so good stuff.
Oh,
And we have to be soldiers. So thank you all for sharing with us. This is the 32nd National Week of Prayer for the
Yes.
healing of AIDS.
Yes.
We're having noonday prayer every day at noon. Go to our website www.balmingilead.org. Make sure you get our resources. Educate, educate, educate. You don't see too many billboards these days, but HIV is still a major problem in
Yes.
the African American community. Don't
yeah.
get it twisted. And I've shared with you that if you're progressive enough and you want a box of condoms, contact the Balm in Gilead. You want some condoms for your church? Contact us. We will send them to you for free. For free.
Yes.
I know some of you who still stuck, and y'all still stuck, but I'm not talking to you all. I'm talking about those of you who are free to make a real serious difference. This is
Yes.
still a sexually transmitted disease.
That's right.
And if
That's
you
right.
don't want to go out and buy some condoms, you ain't got to tell nobody. Call us up. The Balm in Gilead will send you a whole box of a big box, so that you can make them available to your congregations and
Oh, good.
community. Because just like 30 years ago, and at the beginning of time, when Jesus was sitting around drinking the wine, Yvette, they were
Yeah.
still having sex.
Yes,
Hallelujah.
they were.
Amen.
Yes, they
Thank
were.
you. Thank you all so much. We are out of here. And thank you, Yvette, and thank you, Edwin. I love
We
you
love you,
so
honey.
very much.
Thank you.
And
God
at the
bless
end
you.
of the day, regardless of what's going on, COVID-19 or whatever's happening in your life,
Yes.
there is always a balm in Gilead. God bless you.